My name is Jason Nash. I'm the Data Center Practice Director for Vero. We are a regional data center focused partner based out of the Carolinas. And today we're going to talk about the distributed switch. So a lot of good stuff was announced this morning, and I had to revamp a whole lot of things when they decided to make the announcement today. So we'll see how this goes. Probably go okay. We'll see when we get here. How many people out there are running the distributed switch already? Wow. Okay, that's great. That's good. My numbers, I've done this about 3 years. The numbers keep going up. That's good. I'm very happy to hear that. How many people, next one. There was a session earlier today by Vinky from VMware talking about the new features in 5.1. How many people went to that? Okay. I just want to make sure not cover those too deep if everybody in here raised their hand. So that's good. Okay, well, let's go ahead. So what we're going to talk about today is really a good overview of the distributed switch. And in the past, I've always done sessions either on Cisco's Nexus 1000V or compare and contrast between the two. And this time, it's specifically on the vSphere switch. It's evolved so much that it's a really great option. It's not just kind of the nice switch, you know, if you buy Enterprise Plus licensing. But the features and the enhancements that VMware has done to it in 5 and 5.1 are really good. So we're going to talk a lot about those. And the idea here is to give you kind of an overview of complexity, features, cost, deployment considerations, and management. These are questions that I get asked all the time. You know, what does it take to deploy this? What is it going to do to my operational processes? What do I need to worry about? And really, what do I need to do up front? So I want you guys to walk out of here with, you know, understanding how this can really fit in your environment and see, you know, is this a great fit for what you want to do? With everything that was announced this morning with the vCloud bundles and all this stuff, it's really becoming the way to move for most environments, not just the larger one. So it's an open presentation. I've given similar versions of this at vMugs and things. It's a little harder to do open, you know, session here with about 800 people. But if you do have a question, throw your hand up. I'll do my best. A lot of this is going to be lab. So I've got a lab running here. I'm running AutoLab. If you haven't checked out the AutoLab project, it is great. It's a great way to build up a nested lab. That's what I'll be doing on my MacBook here. We finally got it talking to the projector, so that's a good thing, and we'll be using that. So a couple of things. First of all, let's discuss vSwitches real quick. Why do I want to move off of vSwitches? Well, there's a lot of good things about them. You know, they're easy to understand. I can rebuild a vSwitch environment in a minute. I can get on the command line of a vSphere host that I've screwed the networking up on, and with a couple of commands, at least get it back online and probably get it back to where it was. It's very simple to understand. And it's, believe it or not, it's very flexible because you can build out vSwitches and do uplinks and do different tagging and, you know, teaming and failover policies and things that you can do with a distributed switch, but it's still very flexible. So I see a lot of people still use it. Even in complex environments, they script it out and they understand it. But everything's not all good. You know, the biggest issue here is you're going to see, well, you have already seen VMware stop adding things to the standard switch. You know, in 5, we got a lot of cool features. Load-based teaming and network resource pools and then enhanced network resource pools. None of that made it down to the standard vSwitches. It all went into the distributed switch. So you're kind of at a point in time with the vSwitch, and that's where you're going to stay. If you start looking at vCloud Director, I'm going to tell you right now, you don't really want to do it with standard vSwitches. You're going to want to do it with the distributed switch. And it can become cumbersome. I mentioned a minute ago that it's very flexible. I still see them in large environments, but that doesn't mean that that's what you want to do. You usually end up scripting it out a lot more. Now, my buddies, you know, Josh Atwell, who did a session earlier, will tell you that scripting is a wonderful thing, and I agree, but it's not something that I always want to do. So why bother with the distributed? Well, the VDS, and if you notice, VMware called me out on this, so I'm just going to tell you, it's capital VDS now. Do not, for any reason, put lowercase VDS. They will get on you about it. But if you noticed in VXLAN this morning, what'd they do? They made the V little, and it's like, really? So, but I just have to say that. It's easier for medium and larger environments. You add a port group in vCenter, they show up everywhere. But I'm going to jump to the bottom. It's not just for large environments. I have customers all the time that say, hey, Jason, I got Enterprise Plus. I don't really care about the VDS. I'm not a big environment. I got 8 hosts, 12 hosts, whatever. It's not that big a deal. Well, it's not just about port group creation. There's a lot of other features that you don't get with the standard switches. You don't get network I/O control. I can't put shares and limits on different traffic types like you can with the distributed switch. Port mirroring doesn't function on the standard vSwitch. There's no NetFlow support. There's no private VLAN support. There's no ingress and egress traffic shaping. You only get one direction with the standard switch. So again, it's not about I make a port group in one place and it shows up everywhere. It's about all these other features. The next question I usually get is how does it compare to the others? Really quick. You got 3 distributed switch options. VMware's VDS, Cisco's 1000V, and IBM's announced, but yet nobody has ever seen it in the wild, 5000V. That's not meant as a joke. They announced it, nobody's seen the thing. But, you know, the VDS competes well in all areas. When they added things to 5, and they added the features you saw today in 5.1, it really competes well against the other switches. The other thing that you need to look at when you look at how it competes, say, against Cisco, Cisco talks a lot about their 1000V, but they don't just talk about that. They talk about their ecosystem. They talk about VSG, virtual ASA. They talk about virtual WAS. Now, VMware doesn't compete directly on all of those, but a lot of the security features are part of the vShield suite that plug right into the switch. So you start adding everything that VMware's done, and it's very, very compelling. So let's real quick talk about some of the new enhancements in 5.1. You'll see it live here in a minute. I didn't build these slides. There we go. So there's a ton of stuff, some good, some minor, some things you might not care about. We'll talk about these as we roll through. Rollback and recovery is big. Configuration backup is big. These are what I call your safety nets. They are finally going to convince people that, yes, I can run everything through the distributed switch and not stress about it. All right? We can recover things. LACP support. I can't tell you, I've had a bunch of customers look at the 1000V just because it supports LACP. That's not a reason to deploy the 1000V, but they sure do look at it for that. So we now get LACP support. SRIOV. How many people here know what SRIOV is? Yeah, it's about it's a reasonable number, but not a lot. SRIOV lets you take a physical PCIe device, subdivide it up into a bunch of virtual PCIe devices. I do a lot with the Cisco UCS product and the VIX. Think of Flex 10s on HP. So it's a standard way to do these things. It's only supported on the VDS. The other features that we've got, scale enhancements nobody cares about. Performance is great. Health check, we'll talk about that. RSPAN and ERSPAN. Great thing about distributed switch is I can do port mirroring. What if I want to port mirror from that VM on that host to that VM on that host? Crap, I can't do that. Now you can. Now we can port mirror from that VM and ship it to an IP address anywhere else in the network. IP fix, also known as NetFlow version 10, SNMP, NetDump. We get BPDU filter and some other enhancements. So it's a lot of good stuff. VMware wants me to make sure and tell you this, but it's true. Oh, they didn't change the V. Look at that. And that it's really built as the platform for the future. They're talking about, spanning multiple data centers, using VXLAN as your transport. Look at Nicira. Look at what's happening as far as virtualizing the network layer. And that's really all going to be based on the distributed switch. So if you're looking to do things like that, you need to be looking at using the distributed switch. Those standard vSwitches just aren't going to do it anymore. So I asked about this session earlier, so you already missed the Monday at 2:30. There is a Wednesday at 4 where they're talking in depth about what's new. I'm going to go over some stuff, especially in the demo lab. But if you want to spend an hour talking about these new features, go see that. Also, this is the other thing. If you want to use the new features in 5.1, you got to use the web interface. So you'll see me use the web interface here in a minute. And I kind of went back and forth on whether I was going to use it, because are you going to spend more time, I've never seen the web interface, looking at me click around trying to find my way, or is it better to actually acclimate you to that? But I'm going to use the web interface. You can still do all legacy functions through the VI client, but VMware basically halted development on the VI client. So things like enabling health check, enabling LACP, can't do that in the standard VI client. You've got to do that through the new web interface. The good news is the web interface is actually pretty good. It's very good. You're just going to have a little trouble finding your way around if you've never used it. So now let's actually talk about the switch. The good, it's innovative. It's low complexity. The biggest issue I have, say, with the Nexus or even IBM's switch is there's other external components to deploy and manage. With the 1000V, we've got the VSM and the VEMs, the supervisor modules and the Ethernet modules. You have to deploy those. You have to upgrade them. You have to manage them, back them up, and all that. Normally, they're owned by the network team, and then you get into this whole thing of we need to upgrade our vSphere, but we haven't upgraded the 1000V, and blah, blah, blah. You don't have to worry about that. Everything is built into vCenter and the vSphere host. It's included in Enterprise Plus. You do not have to pay an extra per socket licensing for the VDS. Yeah, you got to buy Enterprise Plus, but I'm going to tell you now, VMware really wants you to buy Enterprise Plus. So get used to it. No more VRAM though, right? You know, no special hardware. You don't need anything. You don't need any special NICs. You don't need any switches. You can buy whatever, use whatever. The VDS doesn't care. There is a bit of a learning curve. It does increase reliance on a robust vCenter. It used to be that vCenter was almost disposable. If I blew it up, I just build another one in an hour, reconnect my host, and as long as I didn't have complex resource pools, I didn't really care. Those days are gone. I'm just going to tell you now, with everything else relying and plugging into vCenter, it's time to really treat that as a full Tier 1 app and protect it. It also requires Enterprise Plus licensing, so while yes, it does come with it, it requires you to bump up. Thankfully, there's other things coming in Enterprise Plus now that makes it more, more cost beneficial, I guess you would say, to go up to Plus, where it used to be like, okay, I got this distributed switch, and I got third-party multipathing if I paid EMC more money. And then, let's see, I got host profiles, but they used to not be great, but now they are. So there's a lot of stuff now that you get in Enterprise Plus. Architecture is very simple. You've got a normal control plane or management plane. That's built into vCenter. You've got an I/O or a data plane. That's the guy that actually switches frames. That's built into vSphere. Nothing else to add. Nothing else to install or upgrade. So that's very, very good. So deployment considerations. And we'll get into this more as we walk through a deployment. Make Virtual Center resilient. Back up the database. A vCenter outage doesn't affect general VM operation. Most people think that if vCenter's dead, I can't do anything like boot VMs. I'll talk to you about that, but yes, you can. You may not be able to build a new VM, or if you have a VDI workload where you're spinning up pools of VMs, we're going to want to talk about what you need to do there, but we can absolutely work around that. Virtual vCenter, physical vCenter, I don't care. I really don't care. Normally, I tell people to do virtual. That's VMware's current best practice, as they say. And you can absolutely run vCenter on top of a vSphere host with all networking going through the distributed switch safely and reliably. So there's no reason to shy away from that. One area of confusion that I often get is how do I separate traffic? And I'll show you this as we go through. When I roll a host into the distributed switch, it says which of those physical NICs, I'll call them PNICs, which PNICs do I want to move into that switch? Think about when you create a vSwitch and you add physical NICs as uplinks. When I create a distributed switch and add hosts to them, I have to add those NICs as uplinks. The only downside is a distributed switch has one set of uplinks. All NICs in that uplink group have to pass and trunk the same VLANs. Well, Jason, what if I want to pass NFS traffic over these two and VM traffic over these two and vMotion and FT over those? Well, we'll have to work around that, but it's not that complicated, and I'll talk about that in a second. And the other thing is confirm standard physical switch port config. Make them all the same. I'm so tired of troubleshooting network issues in VM environments where this top-of-rack switch is kind of the same configuration as that top-of-rack switch, yet this one's trunking VLANs, but that one's not, and then we add port groups so they works on these but not those, and it just stop doing that. Make everything standard, make everything the same. So designing the deployment of VDS is usually very simple. It can get more complex. If we want to do things like network resource pools, if we want to do traffic shaping, if we want to do segmented or say, DMZ type networks, it can get more complex. I always tell people to start basic and then start adding those features such as NIOC. Don't start doing traffic shaping until you get the switch in a good stable state and then start doing that. Real quick on traffic separation, you've got two options. First of all, you can have multiple distributed switches. People are like, well, why would I want to do that? Isn't that the whole point of this, is to have one? Well, I don't care. I mean, you can have one vSphere. You'll see that I'm very opinionated about this, but you can have a single vSphere host be a member of multiple distributed switches. You may have a distributed switch with physical uplinks just for NFS traffic, and another distributed switch with uplinks just for VM traffic. Nothing wrong with that. You can absolutely do that. You can also do what we call active standby unused. So on a port group by port group basis, NFS port group, VM port group, iSCSI, fault tolerance, whatever. You can go through all the uplinks that you've added, say you've added 8 NICs to the switch, and say these 2 are active, these 6 are unused. Then you go to the next one. Well, now those 2 are active, and these 6 are unused. And you go port group by port group. That's the VMware recommended method. It works very well, just document it. Because I don't want to come in behind you after you got hit by a bus and try to figure out why in the heck did you do it like this. So just make sure you document it. But other than that, you have 2 options: multiple switches or active standby unused. Real quick, simple diagram showing like a vSphere host with 2 distributed switches, 1 prod, 1 DMZ, the physical NICs as uplinks connected to different switches. Nothing wrong with that. Here's an uplink table. I'm going to fly through this. If you want to read this, what I recommend you read is Kendrick Coleman's blog down at the bottom, because I stole this from him. He okayed it. But I get the question a lot on, if I have to add 8 NICs to my uplink for the VDS, any recommended ways to do active standby unused for different traffic types? And you can absolutely, he's got like a ton more examples than this. He already did a better job than I was going to do, so I'm just going to reference his. But it shows you how to do it with 8 1 gig NICs. And there's now one with 10 gig NICs. So again, that's if you have 2 10 gigs and how you might want to separate traffic using active standby unused. Make sure everybody got their pictures. All right. I don't want to be that guy like, click, sorry. All right, so now let's look at the lab. I'm trying not to do a whole lot of PowerPoints this time. I want to do a lot of this via lab, so if there's a question, raise your hand and ask. That's why I've got a lab. This lab will probably work. It's worked about 3 or 4 times when I've gone through this. But it's a live lab, right? You know, what happens, happens. So let's flip. Let's make sure my Mac wakes up. There we go. Ta-da. All right. You don't know how hard that was to make happen 10 minutes before this started. So this is the login to the web interface. How many people have seen this? Really? No, the new 5.1 web interface. How many people have seen that? Yeah, I told you. So it's very different than the old web interface. In fact, I forgot when I asked that question a minute ago because I never use the 5.0 web interface. I completely forget that thing exists. So we can use Windows authentication. Hopefully this will work. And we'll log in and see the new setup. And I'm going to tell you right now, if anybody's actually used this a lot, I'm probably not taking the most efficient routes between objects. haven't done enough with it to get super efficient. It's going to warn me here that I've got vCenters with expiring keys because I'm using eval licensing. So here we go. Just in case you haven't seen this, object browser on the left, big window in the middle, and all your tasks and alerts here on the right. And you can do there's other plugins and things you can add there. So we'll go to vCenter. Here's all a list of all the objects vCenter can think about. So I'm going to go to distributed switches. If you've seen the vCloud Director interface, you see a lot of those kind of stylings move over to this. Good, bad, I don't know, depends what you think about vCloud. So first thing we're going to do is there's 0 distributed switches. So I need to build my base switch. First thing you do is build that framework, and then you start migrating hosts and VMs to it. So that's what we're going to do first. Click plus. Some of this workflow is the same as it was in 5.0 or 4.1. It just looks a little different. But they have made a lot of minor tweaks and sometimes major tweaks to the workflow to smooth this out. I'm very, very happy with what VMware has done as far as workflow management. So first, give me a switch name, VDS session, or VMworld. It's going to say which data store or a data center do you want to build it in. I've only got one, so that makes that simple. And it always asks you what version. You may have version 5 host still in your environment, and therefore they cannot take advantage of the 5.1 features. If everybody's on 5.1, do 5.1. If you do have to do a 4.1 or a 5.0 distributed switch, you can come back later and rev it non-disruptively to the current version. So if 5.2 ships or whatever next comes out from VMware and you upgrade your host, you will then, when everything's upgraded, rev that switch up to that feature level. If you don't rev it to the feature level, you don't get cool stuff like LACP or some of that. It just doesn't show up. So 5.1. Number of uplinks. This is one of these questions I love to ask VMware. Number of uplinks says, how many physical NICs out of your vSphere host are you going to roll into the switch at one time? All right. So you can set it anywhere from 1 to, I think, 32 or maybe 128. So the question I always have is, well, do I set it to the exact number or do I add more? What if I add more? And VMware always says, well, it takes a little bit more memory on each host. Well, how much more memory does it take? I don't know. Well, they never know. So The thing to remember this is, if you set it to 4 now and you add a quad port NIC to all your servers later, you just come back in here and change it to 8. It doesn't hurt anything. It doesn't disrupt anything. So figure out what you want to have and start with that. By default, you can enable network I/O control. This is a nice feature added. The 5.0 deployment used to say, do you want me to create a distributed switch or a distributed port group, but I'm not going to let you name it or do anything to it. Now you can at least name it. You still can't change the settings on it. I still can't tell it what VLAN to tag, so I usually just say no. I'll do it myself. And then it says, OK, I'm done. I'm going to deploy a VDS called this version, this number of uplinks, I/O control, and here's what I suggest you go do next. And it says you should probably click this icon here to create new port groups, and you should probably click this icon here to add host from the add host to the switch. It's a pretty good suggestion, so we'll say finish. Over here on the task, you'll see it kick off, and it's going to create the switch, which we have right here. So we'll click that as an object, and now everything reshifts and focuses on the new distributed switch. A couple of things. First of all, my resolution is awful to be doing this. There we go. If you've seen the 5.4.1.5 whatever GUI in VI client for the distributed switch, this is going to look real familiar. I just don't have any port groups on the left, so we'll create some of those in a second. If you notice in the old one, we do properties, and here's the overall switch properties of the switch itself. You can edit these here. And it's real simple. It's the stuff we just did. Remember I told you could come back in and change this to 8 anytime? That's where you do it. You hit 8, you hit OK, you go about your business. Now you can roll 4 more uplinks from each vSphere host. Here's one thing that nobody talks about that people need to do. To the right of that is edit uplink name. Why would I want to edit the uplink name? Because when I come in and do a health check or a redesign analysis on your VMware environment, and I see you've got 8 NICs per host, and they're all in different orders, and they're all different on the vSwitches, and they're just not the same across the entire environment, I'm going to ding you on that because they need to be consistent. One way you can make them consistent is, and you'll see this when we migrate a host, is when you say, all right, I want to move VMNIC 0 into this uplink group for the distributed switch. And it's going to say, would you like to tell me which uplink number you want, or you just want me to add it to the next one? And most people just add it to the next one and end up with a mix of uplinks. Well, that's all fun and games until you start doing active standby unused to split out traffic types, and then they're not the same anymore. So what I do is I'll do like onboard NIC 1, onboard NIC 2, quad NIC 1, quad NIC 2. It's harder to type in front of 800 people than you'd think. So then you just, when you start rolling them over, you make sure the correct VMNICs get assigned to the right uplinks, so when I do active standby unused, I know which ones I'm doing. It's the little things that make your life easier at 2 a.m. when you're trying to troubleshoot a problem, and that's one of them. So do that, and then the advanced is very simple. Click. This is where you set MTU. If you want to use jumbo frames, you'll just put 9,000 or 8,000 or whatever you're going to use right there. Hit OK. Configure your uplink switches for that. Maximum ports per host, that's 512 VMNICs or VNICs can be plugged into this whole switch. 512 may not be enough. You may have a 2,000 client VDI deployment, so you may need to raise this. By default, it's 512. The VDS, unlike vSwitches, supports both CDP and LLDP. LLDP is like CDP, but standard. So if you want to know what my neighbors are and configurations are and what I'm connected to, you'll use those. Pick one, and I normally suggest you do both instead of advertise or listen. That way you can see it from both ends. And then if you want to set an admin name and contact because you've got a large environment, you can absolutely do that. You'll say OK. How many people here use private VLANs in their environment? That's good. Numbers going up every year. Private VLANs, the actual configuration has not changed. For those that don't know what a private VLAN is, it's basically I'm going to butcher this in 5 seconds, but it's basically a VLANs in a VLAN. I can have a DMZ network, and I can have a cluster of servers that can talk to each other, and they can talk to the firewall, but nothing else. And then I can have some isolated servers that can only talk to the firewall and can't talk to anything else. And I can have them all in the same layer 3 address space. It's basically like doing layer 2 MAC filtering, but much more scalable. And you do the same thing here. You'll notice that we used to go into the properties of the distributed switch and set all these as tabs across the top. They've split them out here in this interface. And all you do is the same thing you used to do. You do edit, and you add what we call primary VLAN, and then you add what we call our secondary VLANs right there. This makes a lot of sense if you actually use private VLANs, but it allows you to subdivide a layer 3 network without actually subnetting a layer 3 network. NetFlow support is pretty simple. The configuration here has not changed. It just now supports IPFix, or as it's called, NetFlow version 10. You point it to the IP address of your NetFlow collector on whatever port that you use. They are all different, so figure out what yours uses and plug that in there. And then on this NetFlow collector side, when it's showing you all these really cool charts and graphs of your traffic and your conversations and your protocols and all this, it's going to show up as an IP. You give it an IP right there. That's what it's going to show up. This doesn't give the IP to the switch. It just says when you send data to that NetFlow collector for tracking this stuff, say it came from this IP. That's all it does. And then you've got your basic things here, your sampling rates, your export timeouts. Usually your NetFlow collector configuration will tell you those. If you're not using NetFlow and you're using distributed switch, look really hard at it. It is a great way to get aggregate and really per VM, per traffic, per connection, all sorts of great information about your application traffic flows.
How much kind of overhead does that add?
It's not a lot because it's not mirroring traffic. It's sending statistical information. So he asked how much overhead did that add. It's not much. Now, you'll see this when I create a port group that it lets me, I'm checking my time, that it lets me enable and disable NetFlow on a per port group basis. So I can say I want to track stuff on this port group but not that port group. So you can get granular with it, and it's really good. If you want to play with it, the Manage Engine NetFlow collector is free, plus a 30-day eval for full support. I need to see if the SolarWinds free one supports this version of the switch yet or not, but there's a lot of good free ones out there to really get some great information out of what your network is doing. Port mirroring. The port mirroring workflow has changed completely for the better. It used to be kind of weird how you would configure this. Now it's really simple. Again, you create port mirroring sessions at the full switch level. You do that because you can create them as disabled mode and then enable them whenever you want them. They're not created at the port group level, they're created at the full switch level. And just really quick, click New. You've got some options. If you've seen the old interface, this is going to be like, well, that's a lot of stuff. But it's just different things. It's basically saying, what do you want to use as your source and what do you want to use as your target? Here's the real short answer. Do encapsulated. Because encapsulated, I can say, I want to pull all traffic from virtual machine Josh, and I want to send it to my Wireshark VM, and this is the IP. And if that Wireshark VM gets vMotion somewhere else, it'll still go to that IP. If I want to send that traffic to a network probe somewhere on that side of the network, it'll go by that IP. So unless you have a reason not to use encapsulated or ER-span, just use ER-span. It works really well. Else you can do like remote mirroring and port mirroring. You can say, I want to capture all traffic from VM Josh, and I want to send it up this physical uplink out of a server, VMNIC4, and then assuming you've got a device on the other end of VMNIC4 that captures traffic. That used to be the way you had to do it. Now we can do remote span, and it's much, much simpler this way. The rest of this looks just like the old interfaces. You give it the name, you can set disabled, come back in here anytime and enable it. You can truncate the packets. If you only care about the headers, truncate them. Don't ship all 1,500 bytes of those things around. And you can change your sampling rates and all that. And your source and destination. Here's one great feature that anybody that's actually used this in 5. In 5, for your source, if it was a VM, what'd you have to do? You had to go to the distributed switch, pull up the list of all your VMs and all your distributed virtual switch port numbers, which are just handed out randomly almost, and say that VM is DV port 87, and you'd come in here and type 87. Now, if I had any VMs on it, it would show them in a list, and you could just pick and choose. That's one of the best features that they've done. And then next is just going to be, give me the IP you want me to ship the stuff to. Much simpler workflow, much easier to use. Health check. Health check is awesome. Okay? This is like the simplest feature, but it's going to be a really popular one. It does a couple of things. First of all, it basically says, is your distributed switch configuration matching your physical switch configuration, or is there a disconnect between the two so you can go yell at the network team and say, I told you to trunk VLAN 87, it's not doing 87. It says so right there. What you do is you come in and you just enable this, and it does periodic checks. So we can say enabled and enabled. First thing it's going to check is VLANs and MTU. So if you create a port group on VLAN that's tagging VLAN 87, it's going to try to send frames out 87 and see if they come back. If it doesn't, it's going to assume that the trunking is incorrect on the physical switch. MTU is the same thing. If I set an MTU at 9,000 on this distributed switch, it's going to send a jumbo frame out every now and then and see if it gets it back. The way this works is you have to have at least 2 NICs in your uplink groups for all your hosts, because it's going to send it on the first NIC and expect to see it back in on the second NIC. If you only have 1, it doesn't actually run the health check. The next one is teaming and failover. This is one I get a lot. I actually tried to submit a session here on just physical connectivity and the different teaming and hashing types, because I spend a ton of time talking about that and they canceled that one. But the point is, if you've got IP hashing turned on and your switches aren't set for IP hashing because their port channel config's not right, it's going to throw a flag and warn you. To do teaming and failover, you have to have two servers in the switch, minimum of 2, with 2 NICs each. So you can do MTU and VLAN with just 1 host in the switch. You're probably going to have at least 2 anyway, but I'm just telling you if you want to try it in your lab, you got to have 2 and 2 on the teaming and failover. But it will. It'll throw an alert right down here at the bottom where it says alarms if you try to do that and it detects a problem, and then you can go discuss it with the network team, not sit here scratching your head wondering why it's dropping frames. So the long and short of this is you've now configured the framework, the main switch. Next thing you need to do is create some port groups. So right here is an icon for that, and I'll do a couple real quick. So we'll do management. It's going to ask you some information. Static binding, port binding type, real quick. Port binding type means when a VM connects to the distributed switch for the first time, its NICs, each one connected to the switch, gets a DV port number. If it doesn't have this number, it can't talk to the switch and it won't power up correctly. So you've got 3 types. You really only have 2 types. Dynamic is deprecated. Don't use it. It's going away. I'm surprised it's still here now, to be honest, but it is going away, which leaves you with static and ephemeral. Static is really simple. I'm a VM, I boot up, I talk to the distributed switch, I get number 182. I always have 182. Until I'm destroyed, I'm 182. If I boot up and vCenter's not there, I'm 182. I don't need vCenter to tell me what my switch port ID is, okay? If I'm dynamic, I ask when I boot, hey vCenter, I need a switch port ID, and it gives me one. What if vCenter's down? Oh well, hope you can get that back up, but you're going to be in trouble. Ephemeral is no binding. Think of ephemeral like this. Each vSphere host has a pool of DV port numbers, and when I boot up as a VM on a host, the host hands me one locally. The bad thing about this, because everybody's like, well, why don't I just use that? The only downside to that really is that if I vMotion a VM around, every time it moves, it gets a new DV port number. I lose all my statistics. I lose all my tracking. A lot of your NetFlow collection is going to be based on DV port numbers. Be careful with that. We do see a use of ephemeral maybe if you're doing large VDI deployments or even smaller ones, and you don't want to base things on vCenter. Because, yeah, already existing VDI client may be able to boot up without vCenter, but I can't spool up new VDI clients in a pool if vCenter's dead. So just be careful with things like that. I normally say static. Port allocation, you tell it how many ports you're allowed to plug into this port group. How many NICs can I plug in? And you used to have to set this. You still can. You can do fixed, and it's 128 by default, and you can raise that. So you get to 129, it throws an error. You come back and you bump it to 256. Well, why don't you just set it to 256 to start? Because the more you add, the more memory it takes on each host. How much memory does it take? Nobody can tell me. And I'm not making that up. I've asked that. So what they've done, everybody knew where this was going as soon as I started, but you now have elastic. It starts with 8. When you get close to it, it gives you more. When you get close to that, it gives you more. Just use elastic. Network I/O control and resource pools. Resource pools I don't see used a lot, and I think they should. It basically gives you 7 traffic types plus your port groups, and you can set shares and limits on those. So I can give VM traffic 50 shares and NFS traffic 100 shares. Under contention, NFS gets 2 to 1. Real simple, just like we do with CPU and memory. If you have that set up, you can set it here. VLAN type, everybody's probably seen this. How am I doing my VLAN trunking? If I'm just going to tag VLANs, I set that. If I'm going to do a whole bunch of VLANs off of one port group, I can do that. And if you do private VLANs, if we had configured it, you would say which of the private VLANs isolated to the community that you'd choose there. For my lab, I do none for this one. This is another workflow enhancement. Check this box, and I now get to walk through all the different tabs in my port group. So I check it, this stuff appears, I hit next. Do I want to change the standard 3 security settings that have been in VMware for a long time now? Do I want to change my traffic shaping? Remember, I've got ingress and egress traffic shaping. Just a heads up, people get this confused all the time. Traffic shaping policy is applied individually to each port in the port group. What does that mean, Jason? That means that these settings here are not the aggregate for the port group. If I set ingress at 10 megabit, it means each VM's NIC in the port groups gets 10 megabit. It doesn't mean as a whole it gets 10, each NIC gets 10. People misread that all the time and wonder why it's not taking effect. It's taking effect, you just don't have a single VM hitting that number. That's why. So just keep that in mind. Ingress, by the way, is anything going into the switch. Egress is anything going out of the switch, not the host, the switch. Teaming, you set teaming and failover on a per port group basis in the distributed switch. Sometimes this confuses people. So what I tell them is, think of a port group like an individual vSwitch. You set all the options on the port group. This is how we can do active, standby, and unused on individual port groups. So if I only wanted to use onboard NIC 1 and quad NIC 1 for management, that's how I'd do it. And then I'm going to pass all my VLANs to all 4 of those NICs, but he's only going to use those 2 for management traffic. Here's the downside to this. We've got some different hashing types. Let's say you're a fan of route based on IP hash. The only problem is if I have 4 uplink NICs going to my switch, I can't use active, standby, unused, and IP hashing. Why? That uplink switch has no clue that I've made those config changes. He doesn't know that I'm restricting management to these 2 NICs and NFS to those 2 NICs. He just hashes across all 4 that he sees in the channel. So that is one downside and one reason to do multiple distributed switches if you're going to use IP hashing. How many people who use load-based teaming are good? Load-based teaming is awesome. There's only a few use cases where it's not the choice that I usually pick. If you haven't seen it, it's very much like hash based on virtual port ID, meaning each VM gets pinned to an uplink in my uplink group. If I've got 4, first 4 VMs go 1, 2, 3, 4. The next 4 go 1, 2, 3, 4, and we just round robin between them. What's the problem with round robin load balancing? It's not load balancing. It's load distribution. And the reason for that is the first VM and the 5th VM end up on the same NIC, and they may be my heaviest hitters. So if you use route based on virtual port ID, you're stuck. You've rolled the dice, you've run the stats, you're out of luck. With load-based teaming, also known as hash based on physical NIC load, VMware looks at those NICs and goes, you know, NIC 1 is really busy. I got 2 busy VMs on there. And it looks at it for 30 seconds, and if the load is over 75%, 70 or 70, I think it's 75, for 30 seconds, it starts moving VMs to other less utilized NICs. I'm not going to tell you that 4 NICs are going to give you 4 gigabit of throughput because it's not going to happen, but it's going to give you a lot closer to 4 than just standard load distribution would. Why wouldn't I use this? Because maybe I've got a server VM with 1,000 clients, and I want all 1,000 clients to be hashed across all my uplink ports. The only way to do that is IP hashing. With virtual port ID hashing, everything going in and out of a VM goes on 1 NIC. So if you have a server VM that you need much more granular load distribution, IP hashing is your answer. Else, physical NIC load. And I'll be honest, I have not checked physical NIC load on this lab, so I'm not going to use it. Okay. Failure detection, these are the same. Link status or beacon. Just remember, if you use beacon probing, you got to have more than 2 NICs in your uplink. Why? Because they look and see which link has failed with beacon probing. If we've got 2 NICs and they don't see each other, they don't know which one's at fault. They'll be pointing at each other going, that guy doesn't work, that guy doesn't work. If you've got 3, you got to kind of got a tiebreaker, so you got to have more than 2. Failback, if you're using active and standby, you can tell it to fail back. That's the same. That's no different. Let me move these back. Monitoring, I said a minute ago you can do NetFlow on a port group by port group basis. This is how. Yay or nay. Miscellaneous, if for some odd reason you want to block every port in the port group, you can set that to yes and everything stops running. So be careful. No. It's 10. Any version you want, as long as it's 10. The nice thing is, I'm not a huge NetFlow person, to be honest with you, but it's a much more standardized version of NetFlow, and it's been around for several years, so everything should support it. But no, you don't get, that's the only downside to this is there's not a lot of configuration options. You can't set any of that stuff. You can't set what I want to capture, what I don't want to capture. It's 10, and that's it. It's not like the 1000V where I can set up those NetFlow policies and monitoring policies. You just don't get that flexibility. And then you can set your descriptions and your overrides. So we're done. And you'll see it create the port group right here. So at this point, we've created the switch. We've configured the base settings, going through all those options, and we've created our first port group. And I'm going to streamline this next process real quick. This is how I do a migration of an existing environment. I do migrations to DV switches in the middle of the day in production environments, no problem, with no downtime. It's not hard to do. Be methodical and test, and then you're fine. And the way you do it is real simple. It's actually better now in 5.1 than it used to be. So up here's a little icon with a wrench on a couple of servers. It says add servers. This is another workflow enhancement that I love. So you've got a few things. Number one is add host. I'm going to add an existing host to the distributed switch. It's going to say which NICs do you want to migrate over? Do you want to migrate your VM kernel interfaces on over, because the wizard will do that for me? Do you want to migrate your VMs over? It'll do that in one shot for me. You can do the whole host, multiple hosts really. I could do 20 hosts at one time and let it walk through and do it all for me, and I do that. But normally I don't start with that. So that's how you do one host. The downside used to be in 5 that what I normally do is, most vSphere hosts and all the vSwitches have at least 2 NICs for redundancy, right? You all do that, right? Yeah, Jason, we all have redundant NICs. So what I do is I walk a host over. I pull one NIC out of each vSwitch and put it in a distributed switch. And then I create temporary VM kernel interfaces on the distributed switch with some free IP addresses and make sure I can ping across. That tells me my configuration is good, and it tells me everything's working. And then I destroy those temporary VM kernels, and now I go and I manually walk the VM kernels over for management and NFS, iSCSI, whatever. Then I walk the VMs over, and then I walk the last physical NICs over. Very methodical process, and I'll usually do 2 hosts like that to make sure everything's good, and then I use the wizard for the rest. Downside to that is that I have to manually do those 2 hosts when I want to walk them over. We now have a new option there called migrate host networking. Migrate host networking may sound like the first option, but it's not. It says you've got a host on the DV switch already, and now you want to migrate the rest of your stuff, the rest of your VM kernels, the rest of your physical NICs, the rest of your VMs. It'll wizard that for you so you don't have to do it manually. That's a really nice feature. Remove hosts is remove hosts, obviously. And the bottom one is really odd. Add and migrate. What does that mean? That means that I have walked the first 2 over halfway, and then I've got 6 more hosts to do, and that option right there lets me do it all in one shot. Why would I want to do it all in one shot? Because I know it's going to be the same if I do that. It's going to migrate everything over, it's going to move the VMs, move the VM kernels, and do it all in one shot, and it's going to be consistent when I get there. So it allows you to step through a migration process. So first thing you do is add a host. This is a weird, gooey thing. I hate this. I'm very honest with my opinion. But you get to this and it says the list is empty, and the first thing you think is, well, why don't my hosts show up? Well, they don't show up because you got to go up here and press plus, pick a host, or more than one, and then they add them. I just do not like that GUI element. So don't freak out when it says nothing in the list. Next. Then it's going to say, all right, Jason, you've got 4 physical NICs in this machine, VMNIC 0 through 3. Here's the switches that are plugged into, and you can absolutely rip one out of an existing switch and move it over. And we're going to move it over to the uplink. So I'm going to do this one and this one. I took 1 from each vSwitch. I forgot to add them back in, but they used to be in there. And here's your DV uplink group. There's no option to change this DV uplink group. You only get 1 uplink group per distributed switch. If this was a Nexus 1000V, you'd use the same wizard to move a host to it, but it lets you have multiple uplink groups. I can say these 3 NICs are for VLAN 20, these 4 NICs are for VLANs 30 through 80, and these are for something else. Different uplink groups. Can't do that here. Then it's going to say, I see you've got 4 VM kernel interfaces, IP storage management, fault tolerance, and vMotion. Do you want to go ahead and migrate those over? I'm going to go ahead and do management. And you select one, because I want to show you how to do it. You select it, go up here, assign port group, and then you tell it which port group you want to add it to. Normally I would not do this because you could strand a host. I'm going to do it here because it probably works. But usually what I would do is go through the rest of this wizard without migrating anything and build temporary VM kernels with temporary IPs and ping across them. New thing in 5.1, it says I'm going to validate changes, make sure you're not about to shoot yourself in the foot. He's like, I don't see anything you're doing wrong. Good luck to you. So you hit next. You can migrate VMs. You basically go through, pick the VM, hit the same icon, and tell it which port group on the distributed switch to move it to, and you can do them all in one shot. You can do hundreds of VMs at one time. And he says, I'm going to add one host, 2 NICs, and 1 VM kernel interface. So we'll do NICs. Nice feature that I'm going to show you while we do this. 2 nice features that I said I'd get to. One is rollback and recovery. Rollback and recovery, I've got some deployment engineers who get a little squeamish on the distributed switch because they're not networking guys. And they've seen hosts get in a bad spot where they have to go to the DCUI interface on vSphere, manually rebuild a standard vSwitch, get the host on its knees, add it to vCenter, all that. With the distributed switch rollback and recovery, we can get around that. I can go in here and make a change, and I'll probably do it here in a second. It's done, so let's just break it for fun. So what we're going to do is if we've got a management VLAN right here, and we've got this guy, and he is .13. Ping -T 192.168.1.13. And he's pinging like a happy little vSphere host. So then what I'm going to do, actually that's not where I want to do it, there. Told you I wasn't very good at this interface. Edit. Advanced. I'm going to set a wrong VLAN number. Normally what would happen is it would change the switch. That host would go non-responsive. And then either I'd have to change the switch or change the host depending on who I broke. Rollback and recovery waits 30 seconds and says, I haven't heard from that guy for 30 seconds. That can't be good. vSphere host is thinking the same thing. I haven't heard from that guy. I haven't heard from vCenter in 30 seconds. We better roll this change back because I don't think he did what he meant to do. So he may, or it may in my case, may have done what I meant to do, just not correctly. But it will roll that change back and throw an alert here in vCenter. And there it goes. Pretty slick, isn't it? It's like the simplest little feature, man, and it's like, finally. So 30 seconds, it will roll it back. The other thing that you can do that I want to get to before I finish this, because I'm going to forget, and excuse me for kind of stepping out a little bit, is, and he's going to complain because it threw an error. Yeah, it throws the alarm right here. If you see the failed job, and actually it just popped up a notification right there and said, yeah, I rolled this or failed this. The other thing that you can do, right-click the distributed switch name, and this is the most unintuitive place to put stuff. All vCenter actions, export configuration. Do you want to export the DV switch and the port groups or just a switch? Do it both. It's going to export and ask if you want to save it to a file and say yes. And it's a zip file containing your VDS configuration. So if you screw it up, you can restore it back in. If you delete port groups, you can just pull those back in. Say that a little bit louder. I don't know. Probably PowerShell, but I'm not a PowerShell guy, so I haven't looked at it, but I would be willing to bet. My understanding is everything you can do in the GUI can be automated.
Is that backup file something that you manually edit so you can import it?
You know, I've never even looked at it. It probably is. And so you can do that. You can import and restore just like that. So that's a big feature. All right, back to the switch real quick. Get you guys out of here because I know the next one's coming up. So at this point, we have migrated a host. We've migrated the networking. I've showed you rollback and recovery. From now on, you just test out your kernel interfaces, make sure they work, and then go back through the wizard again right here. Migrate host networking, and finish up the job. Say plus, say host 3, which is the one we did, and he's going to walk you through that whole wizard again and let you finish migrating. Once you're satisfied that your test host is good and happy and all the stuff works, then you can just start running through the rest of your environment. People get a little bit squeamish when I say that. They're like, yeah, but you're going to change 100 VMs or 300 VMs. Yeah, but all it's doing is just like you right-clicking a VM, edit settings, going to the network, taking the drop-down box for port group and moving it from this one to that one and hitting OK. That's all it's doing in an automated fashion. You will probably drop a frame or a ping, just like you would with a vMotion. When it gets to the other side, gratuitous ARP, everything comes up, and it'll work fine. So I do this all the time, and just be very methodical about it. Flip back over real quick. Best practices real quick. Use static port binding. I suggest that, especially if you're doing a virtual vCenter, or if you only have a single physical vCenter. I didn't get in and talk too much about tagging and VLANs and too much about hashing types, but I see a lot of environments that still use what are called access ports on switches where they don't tag frames in and out of the host and in and out of the switches. Stop doing that. Because one day you're going to want to split traffic out to other things, and it's going to be a lot harder if you're not tagging VLANs. I don't see it as much as I used to, but I see it. Don't use native VLANs. For the love of God, stop doing stuff on VLAN 1, okay? There's reasons for that, okay? And it's going to bite you one day, and you're going to think back to that session, that guy in the orange shirt, and you're like, that guy was right. All right, don't do that. I'll give you another thing I suggest you don't do, just as a heads up for later and some other options. DMZ network, production network, 2 physical networks, I don't care what they are. Don't use the same VLAN numbers on both networks, please. Don't have VLAN 50 for DMZ and VLAN 50 for prod. I've seen it. It will cause you issues later. And I recommend load-based teaming unless you have a situation. Another reason I'm a big fan of load-based teaming is it's just like hash by virtual port ID, which is the default in vSphere. Why is that the default? Because it just works. I could have 8 NICs connected to 8 switches from 8 different vendors from all over. And because I'm not doing anything where the switches have to have knowledge of each other, it just works. Load-based teaming is the same thing. It just works. It's not as heavy as, say, IP hashing where I've got to set up port channels on my switches and LACP or some other things. It just works. So that's what I recommend. Recap, VDS is a lot more than just a single point of management for port groups. It's not. You've got a lot of great features built into that switch, and they're really required for 10 gig and tier 1, is my opinion. So as we move to that, or denser consolidation, 40, 60, 80 to 1 servers, absolutely use those features. Consistency and testing make for a very simple migration. Do the process, and you'll be fine. Very little day-to-day management. You don't have to care and feed this thing. It just runs. And it's the future. Everything you see coming, all that cool stuff that they showed this morning, all the Nicira stuff, you're going to need to be taking advantage of this. That's it. If you got any questions, let me know. I'll be sticking around for a bit. Thank you very much.